So what kind of Buddhist wisdom can we bring, in dealing with stress that will be helpful? I would say that the first step really is to bring greater mindfulness to our experience of stress, so that we recognize when we experience stress. And also, along with it, some degree of the ability to accept the fact that you are experiencing stress. A stressful event has occurred. That, I think, is a very important first step. Another important thing is, one of the central, kind of messages from the Buddhist teachings is the wisdom of being able to let go when necessary. Now, what do I mean by letting go? Is here, for example, earlier I said that much of the toxicity of feeling of experience of stress comes from the fact that we feel overwhelmed. And that feeling of being overwhelmed is, exacerbated by a kind of a constant worrying, because we feel that somehow we do not have control over the situation. Somehow we are juggling, continually juggling, and we don't know when to stop. And this, kind of experience has, along with it, an element of grasping to the situation. So when we experience stress, we get stuck there, and that, being stuck in that experience of stress and thinking about it and worrying about it, we actually add on to the experience of being overwhelmed. And here, being able to let go, to have a kind of a touch of lightness in our experience with it in relation to the stressor situation, I think is an important, kind of solution. But that is tough. Admittedly, that's tough. Now, third thing is, to look at how much of that stress, this feeling of overwhelmedness, is coming from a kind of a focus on self. Because in our experience of dealing with people, in our experience of dealing with situation, often much of the heaviness really comes from having a kind of excessive self-focus. And, just as Buddhism has emphasized, contemporary psychology also reminds us that when we bring too much of our self-consciousness into a situation, we invest in this situation a kind of an importance that is disproportionate to the actual situation itself. So we need to somehow find a way of relaxing our grip on this self. We need to somehow, in plain English, we have to take it easy. We have to learn to take it easy. Now, it is a fine balance. You do want the energy that stress brings, because the energy that stress brings makes you take the situation seriously. But at the same time, you don't want to be overtaken by that feeling of stress, because then you feel disempowered. So it's a fine balance where the stress experience brings alertness, but at the same time, it doesn't take over your ability to handle the situation. So with a clear awareness of the situation, acceptance of the fact that the stressful event has occurred, somehow, not clinging to this experience and being able to let go, and also having a kind of a more relaxed attitude. That, I think, will make a huge difference in dealing with stress. Also, once you are able to do that, you are able to then tap into the energy that the stress brings, where you take the situation seriously and then you immediately look for the solution that the situation calls for. And the beauty of that is then you don't waste your energy trying to suppress the stress. Because often what we do is when we feel stress, we spend so much energy trying to forget about it, trying to somehow, and people may resort to alcohol, people may resort to denial of some form or another. And often we waste so much valuable energy simply trying to suppress it and control it. So if we can somehow learn to let go, relax our ego, and become more aware of the actual situation, then whatever energy that we have, we will be able to use it to deal with the stressor, the source of stress. Whether it is coming from a complication in your relationship, or whether it is coming from a difficult relation with a colleague at a workplace, or whether it's coming from the fact that somehow you're not able to perform that you were expecting. And one of the also beauty of this bringing greater awareness, mindfulness, is also to prevent you from becoming so overwhelmed by stress in future, because part of that has to do with not being able to have enough self-awareness or self-knowledge to know your limits. And then you take on too much, which then makes you feel overwhelmed. Whereas if you have a greater degree of self-knowledge, then you know your own limits, so that you are able to then protect yourself, from getting into such situation in future. So I think these are things that can really, so basically, somehow changing our mindset vis-a-vis stress, so that we don't see stress entirely in negative terms, and then being able to let go, not grasp at the situation, experience, and then having somehow a way of relaxing our sense of self. And these will really help deal with the stressful situations. One of the important challenges when it comes to dealing with stress is how to find a way to leave particularly work-related stress at workplace and do not bring it to your home. In other words, I'm talking about carryover stress. And often when people do this, they are not aware actually this is what they're doing. And by the time they come to recognize what it is, it has already done a damage on relationships. So here, some degree of having mindfulness will make a big difference. And also, what it will do, unless you have a very, very understanding and self-aware and patient and kind partner, who is able to recognize what it is, which is a carryover stress, it could potentially undermine your own relationship at home. Then the question is, how do we leave work-related stress at workplace? And here, I think, each of us really need to develop some kind of ability to switch off. And this is where, it's one thing to physically leave the workplace, but it is something else to mentally leave the workplace. And of course, as human beings, all experiences, particularly powerful ones and painful ones, tend to leave imprint. So, it's very difficult to somehow switch it off like this. But over time, you really can learn to do this. And basically, when you leave the office space, in other words, you leave, the whatever worries, whatever anxieties, whatever difficult relationship exchanges that you have had during that period, just there, so that when you step out of your office, you are kind of another person, a fresh. I think this kind of ability to, shift gears and switch modes is going to be a very important kind of, skill for many of us, where, our workplace, environment is a very stressful environment, where we are constantly running after deadlines, and where we have to be answerable to so many colleagues who are also working collaboratively on a project. So where you don't have much control. You have a role to play, but in terms of timeline and the deadlines and schedules and everything, you don't really have a total control over this. So which means you really have to fully participate, and to do justice to your colleagues' expectation. There is a kind of and often large part of the stress comes from not being able to chase the time. But once you leave the office, you have no excuse to bring that kind of restless mind, worrying mind with you. And I think here, again, a key element is awareness. If you're more aware that you're doing this, that you're bringing this worrying with you, you're bringing this anxiety with you. If you're more aware, then you will learn to generally, gradually not to do it by learning to switch off. And I think this is an important skill, and hopefully we will have time to talk about how actually can one learn to do this switching off, when necessary. Children are very good at it. We adults are not particularly good at it, but this is a skill that we can develop. In my own monastic training, one of the important method of study is debating. And debating is done in a debating courtyard, and sometimes the exchanges can be very heated. But there is a rule in the debating tradition that whatever exchanges that may have occurred, and some of which may have involved a little bit of personal exchanges, should be left within the debating courtyard. And I think that is a very interesting, kind of a principle. And I think this, if we can apply that in our workplace, that the stress and the worry and conflict and all of this, if we can leave at the workplace, and the moment we step out, if we are able to kind of unburden ourselves, from this will make a huge difference. So that's one important point I want to make. And this also has a kind of an ethical implication, because, if you are stressed and if you are anxious, obviously, your partner, your family members, your children are going to get affected. So then it becomes not just your own question of dealing with the stress, you're also dragging your family members, your loved ones in this experience as well. So I think it's an important consideration.